Hi everyone, my name's Aaron Graham. Thank you so much for joining this digital Zoom discussion about hand drumming and teaching hand drumming and the benefits of hand drumming. We're going to talk about a lot today. I'm here on behalf of the Richmond Music School as part of the fantastic Richmond Culture Days, so I'm so glad you're joining me for this. I'm a percussionist, a composer, collaborator here in the Vancouver area. And when I was approached to do a workshop for the Culture Days, looking at the theme of this year's this year's festival being community, accessibility, thinking about things from my world of percussion, the first thing that came to mind was hand drumming. And I thought this would be a great topic to discuss, just some basics, and as I said as well, talk about some of the benefits of hand drumming, or just the fun kind of aspects that you can get into in this whole practice. I think it's something that is very accessible to anyone, whether they're a percussionist or a musician or even a non-musician with no musical background at all. So that was the first thing that came to mind, and I thought, why don't we discuss some of the basics? So that's what we're going to talk about today. Today I'm going to discuss a couple of basic tones that you can produce on a hand drum or some other object, which I'll talk about in a minute. We're going to talk about a couple of simple grooves that you can create with these two basic tones. And then we're going to talk about a little bit about improvising, which is one of the most fun and engaging aspects of playing hand drums, especially in a large group setting. If you have never read music before, don't worry, it's totally fine. If you've never played hand drums before, no problem, you'll be fine to follow along in the workshop today. So I should say, first of all, when I say hand drumming, I mean any drum that you can play with your hands. You don't play with, like you might see percussionists more typically play with sticks or mallets. But these are any kind of drum that you play with your hands. So this drum here is called a djembe. It can be a congas, bongos, cajon. There's a whole bunch of hand drums from all over the world. So I assume if some of you all are non-musicians, then you probably don't own a big, beautiful hand drum like this one here, but that's okay, don't fret. You can still join in what we're gonna do today. If you have some kind of object in your house that is a square, rectangular shape, and has a little bit of depth to it, whether one side is open or not is totally fine. So if you have like a large cardboard box that has a covered top, this you can see I'm just using an old mop bucket. So anything that has a little bit of depth and a little bit of room to play with your hands. So like if you have a really big thick book, that would work. Like an old laundry hamper, maybe you could flip it upside down. So anything like that, feel free to grab. And we're going to do a little bit of playing in the workshop today. Okay, so as I said before, I'll talk about the benefits of everything we're going to talk about later. I think this knowledge could be beneficial to anyone, whether they're a music educator, whether they're a percussionist who has never really studied hand drums before, or even non-musicians, as I said before. So let's talk about the two tones that we're going to learn. The two tones we're going to learn are called bass and open. So the first one, bass. I'll demonstrate it for you real quick. This is what it's going to sound like. So, as you can see, this is kind of a low, kind of open tone, right? So that's kind of the sound you're going for. So to play a bass tone, you want to play with your whole palm right in the center of the drum head, or right in the center of the laundry hamper, or right in the center of the cardboard box. And you might notice when I go up to play that my wrist is hanging down a little bit. So notice that it's not this slap motion where my wrist comes up and then down, but more, my wrist I'm trying to stay as relaxed as possible. And it's almost like I'm just dropping my wrist. right? My teachers always told me, and I always try to keep this in mind, you can imagine if there was a string tied around your wrist, and if somebody's holding up your wrist by this string and then just letting it go, so you're just dropping. So try that at home if you have something you're playing along to. Just a couple of staying nice and relaxed. Shouldn't be any tension in the shoulders, nothing in the back, nothing in the wrist and hands especially. So if you're using something else at home, you can still probably get some kind of low tone, right? You can hear it a little low. Not as nice as the hand drum, but still it'll give you something to play along to, and you can practice that motion. So again, just remember, you want to avoid slapping, right? It's more of a drop motion. Okay, so that's bass. The second tone, as I said, is called open. So the open tone, I'll play it for you real quick so you can see. So, when you play open, you're only going to play with the top part of your hand, so only really your fingers, none of your palm. If I were to draw a line at the bottom of my fingers, I'm basically playing from there up on the drum. No thumb, no palm. And you can see that I move it, whatever you have, rather than playing in the center like we did for bass, I'm going to move out and play on the edge of whatever it is, whatever it is you have. And so you can kind of aim wherever the rim is or the edge of whatever you're using, you can kind of try to put that right pretty close to where the line is under your fingers. See how I'm doing that? And when you play, you're going to play with these fingers, and this is more of a little bit of a slap motion. This is not so much of a drop, but it is more like a normal, like, you know, we do this motion like if we're going to throw a ball. That's what this is more like, a little bit of a slap. Notice that when I play, I'm not leaving my fingers down though, if you watch. See, I don't know how well you can see in the video, but I have a little bit of room. I let them bounce off the head. If you keep them on the drum head, you can hear the difference. It's much more closed, much more choked. That's actually a different tone we're not going to talk about today, but you want to make sure if you're playing an open tone that you're trying to let the drum resonate as much as possible. So your fingers should bounce off a little bit, and you can even see, like in my body or my arms, they're a lot more tense, and you actually have to press to get that choked kind of closed sound, right? So remember, so for open, it should be nice and resonant. Nice and open, fingers bouncing off the head. And then for bass, remember, nice and relaxed, drop, don't slap, and right in the center of the head with your whole hand. So you can practice those at home. Nice, simple exercises you can do just to get the muscle memory of these two tones is to pick a number. We'll say, let's start with 4, and try doing 4 bass tones, 4 open tones. Let's try 2. You can even do 1. And even when I was playing there, I had to remind myself of this motion for my bass tones, not the slap motion. So these kinds of things, these are, you know, if you're working on this stuff and, you know, within a couple of days you don't quite get this perfect, don't fret. It's something after years and years and years, I still have to remind myself to stay relaxed, and just to focus on not being tense and focus on the proper way to play these tones. Okay, so we know bass and open. And I should say, this is a good point to say, whatever you're using at home, it might, of course, it's not going to sound exactly like the nice, big, beautiful drum that I have here, but hopefully the goal is you want to try to find something that will give you 2 different sounds. So even on this old mop bucket, you can even hear a difference. It's a little more closed and a a little more open, right? So I encourage you to experiment with whatever you have in your home, and just with the goal being that you find something that gives you the two most contrasting sounds. That's the goal. Okay, so the next thing, once you've learned these tones and you've kind of practiced the muscle memory of learning these two, let's learn a couple of really simple grooves. So I alluded to this a little bit at the beginning. One of the most fun aspects of playing hand drums is actually playing in a large group, like what most people might call a drum circle. It can be a gathering of friends, it can be whatever, it might be a class or a course that you go to once a week. But if you were to want to join an ensemble like this, a lot of times you would be playing one part of a larger groove, or a groove that has multiple parts. And so what we're going to do, we're going to learn two simple parts that we're then going to combine to play a groove. So there are two parts. You're going to see these come up on the screen as I talk about each of them. If you don't read music, it's totally fine. You can just look and see what they look like. But they're easy enough that you can just memorize them, even if you don't have a musical background. So the first one. So we're going to alternate between bass and open tones, and it's going to sound like this. So the rhythm is do da do da do da do da do da do da, bass, open 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 bass, open. Okay? So, and you can see that I have one hand playing bass, all of the bass notes, and the other hand playing all of the open notes. So whether you're right-handed, left-handed, whatever your preference is, it doesn't matter. Just make sure that you're not trying to play multiple notes in a row with one hand. So you see how comfortable I look when I'm doing this. If you were to try to do multiple notes with one hand, it would look more like. So you can see there's a lot more motion. So it should be, it should be very comfortable. If you want to pause the video and take a screenshot of that, you could even write like all left hand for the bottom, all right hand for the top, or vice versa. So yeah, nice and easy. Do, da, do, da, do, da, do, da, bass, open bass, open bass, open bass, open. If we play a little faster, it'll sound like this. All right, so that's one groove. That's going to be our kind of baseline groove. So our second groove is going to be a little bit trickier because it's going to be all on the offbeats. It's going to nothing falls on the downbeat or the strong beats of the measure. So as musicians, what we call this is it's a syncopated rhythm. So that word syncopation, if you've ever heard that, that's what it means. Anything that's very rhythmic and mostly on the offbeats of a measure. So this is going to be all open tones, no bass tones in this one, and it's going to sound like this. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1. So you can see when I count in, I don't play anything on beat 1. If I go 1, 2, 3, 4, 1. So you see what I mean? Nothing on beat 1. So all open, the rhythm is da, 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 da. You can choose any hand pattern you want to in terms of right hand versus left hand, whatever your preference is. If we play it a little faster, it'll sound like this. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1. All right, so I encourage you, a great way to practice these grooves, now that you know the tones and we're talking about these grooves, is to record yourself playing one and then play the other along with the recording. So we're lucky now we all have phones that we can very easily do this to. Sound quality is not perfect, but you're really just using it to practice. So I'll show you an example of what I mean. So I recorded groove 1 and on my phone, and I'll play that, and then myself I'll play groove 2 along with that, and I'll show you what they sound like together. So here we go. 1, 2, 3, 4. So you see, you can kind of practice how these two sound together. And even if you want to record both, just so you can listen, it should sound like this. I'll let you hear. 1, 2, 3, 4. All right, so you've learned a couple of tones, you've learned a couple of simple grooves, and maybe you've even practiced recording one or the other to hear how they line up together. So now, as I said before, one of the most fun aspects of playing hand drums, and one part, anytime you see any kind of ensemble playing some kind of non-composed composition, or that's a bad word for it, non-composed piece of music or improvisation, a lot of times it will incorporate some aspect of improvisation. And so if you've never heard that word before, what improvisation means is it's like another word for soloing, or basically making up something as part of a musical piece. So like, for instance, in drum circles or in hand drum groups, usually there's some kind of groove going on played by the other players, and one person or multiple people are soloing over top of that. And so this is a very valuable thing to practice as a musician, because a lot of us percussionists, a lot of us academic musicians, we spend a lot of time working on composed pieces of music, but we don't spend a lot of time improvising and coming up with rhythms and melodies right on the spot. So this could be a good thing to practice for your students or for yourself if you're more used to playing composed pieces of music. This is always a great thing to practice, and it'll give you a few tools or a few gestures or phrases or tricks up your sleeve for the next time you find yourself having to improvise. So if you were to teach this, if you're a music educator, and I'll talk a little bit at the end about the benefits of all of this for music educators and for specific people. If you're a music educator, or if you're a non-seasoned improviser, I guess you could say, if you're a new improviser, the first thing I would recommend is to start simple. That's the biggest piece of advice. If you take anything else away from this today about soloing, start simple. Most of us, when we think about a solo, we think about maybe like a guitar solo in a pop song, or like maybe a piano solo, like a pianist in front of an orchestra. And typically, a lot of times, those are fast, they're really virtuosic, they're really impressive. And so students, when they go to solo, for one of the first times, usually what happens is they play something like really extremely fast for about 5 seconds or so, and then they either run out of ideas or they kind of run out of steam, and a lot of times it's not in time, and they don't know what to do after that. So you have to start simple. Any seasoned improviser has spent years working on this, and they kind of have a toolbox of little riffs and gestures and phrases that they can link together to form a really cool solo. So start simple. So what I mean by that is, You as the teacher or you as the student, pick a very simple idea, try recording these two grooves together like I did, and just improvise with that one idea over the groove. So I'll give you an example. We'll do a couple of these. So the first one, da 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 da, all open tones. You could do all bass tones, whatever you prefer. Okay, let's just use that, and I'll show you what I mean. You can kind of play around with the time, where to put it, the volume of it. So I'll show you what I mean. So it'll sound like this.
1, 2, 3, 4.
Right. So very simple. You can see I didn't change it too much. I just one of the measures I played it twice instead of once, and the last measure I changed where I started it. So that simple idea, that one little phrase, you can come up with something a little more interesting than just that, right? Let's do another one. So how about bass da 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 da. So now we're using both our bass and open tones. So let's see how that might sound if I'm just going to use that idea.
1, 2, 3, 4.
All right, so on that one, you see, I kind of used it in some starting at different points in the measure a couple times. I kind of cheated because I did it double speed one of the times. Instead of do da 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 da, I did do da 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 do da 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 da, which is fine. So now you can see how you can take these simple ideas and expand upon them. You can double the speed. You can start them in interesting spots in the measure. You might start soft and get loud, right? So these simple kind of, you might call them permutations of the rhythm, will start to yield you some more interesting results. So let's do one more. What if we did da 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 bass bass? Let's try that one.
1, 2, 3, 4.
All right, so I kind of cheated there a little bit. I kind of took away a couple notes. I added a couple there towards the end. But you can see, if you start simple, it's much easier than starting, if you have an idea in your head, it's much easier than just kind of going crazy with no preparation beforehand, okay? So if we add all three of those together, if you can see, and I don't mean string one right after the other, I mean kind of pick and choose from these three. So we have, let's see, we did the first one, second one, the third one, right? So, so if I kind of pick and choose from those three, it might sound something like this.
1, 2, 3, 4.
Pretty cool, right? So that you just with those three simple ideas, I've had some practice, so I know, where to place them in the measure. I know, a couple times I can do double speed, but with a little bit of practice, you can start playing simple gestures like that yourself and come up with some interesting improvisations. Especially if you have a group of, say 15 hand drummers all sitting around you playing this groove, you can imagine how much fun that would be to try and make up some rhythms on the spot over top of that. Okay, so we talked about a lot today. Let's go back over this. So we talked about two tones, and again, you can use whatever you have in your house. You can use, old plastic buckets, laundry hampers, cardboard boxes, big books, a coffee table if you have, for lack of anything else. If it's something you are maybe interested in, but you don't want to go out and rent a drum or buy a drum right off the bat. So we learned 2 tones. We learned the bass tone and the open tone, right? Remember, bass is full palm, nice and relaxed, almost as if somebody's lifting your wrist up, right? Open tone is top part of your fingers, no palm, and it's more of a slap motion. It's not tense slap, it's more like a tossing a ball loosely slap, right? On the edge of whatever it is you're playing. We learned 2 grooves. Remember, do, da, do, da, do, da, do, da, and 1, da, 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 right? And then we talked about improvising. So I hope you got a little something out of this today. Like I said, I think this knowledge and just a little bit of know-how with hand drums can be very valuable to many people. As I said, for percussionists, especially percussionists who are mostly, for lack of a better word, what you would call academic percussionists, who never really play any kind of anything outside of, the typical, we'll say, like orchestra repertoire or wind band repertoire. This can be a really fun activity and a really something different that you can work on outside of what you typically play. For music educators, a lot of times I've talked to my colleagues, and it's fairly common that as a music educator, especially at the middle school, secondary school level, there will be days where either you need some kind of lesson plan because you're in between concerts, or students might not have their instruments yet or something like that, where you need something that's not your typical lesson plan, or you might be asked by your school to teach some kind of music appreciation course. So having a lesson plan where you can spend a day and teach students the basics of hand drumming and get them soloing and improvising as a group together, it'll be a real fun activity for them that day. And if they've never improvised, even if they're a saxophone player or a violin player or a vocalist, if just improvising these rhythms will undoubtedly help them in their more typical day-to-day musical practice. So whether you're a band teacher, a choir teacher, an orchestra teacher, a jazz band teacher, I think having a little bit of this knowledge will help you at some point in your career, hopefully. And then for anybody who's a non-musician, I think this is a really fun activity. As I said, I think the most fun aspect of it is playing in a group setting. So hopefully we can get back to doing that soon in more normal times. But it's really fun to learn these grooves, especially in a large group. And it's really fun to improvise. You could maybe say it's a good physical motion. I don't know if I would really call it exercise, but it's a really good kind of full body kind of cathartic experience to really play these grooves and really try to solo and play in a large group setting. So I hope you enjoyed this. I hope you got something out of this workshop. Feel free to contact me if you have any questions about this. As I said, I'm here on behalf of the Richmond Music School. Thanks so much to them for having me. Thanks so much to the Richmond Culture Days for having me. I want to mention real quick before I forget that there will be a live Q&A session October 17th at 7 p.m. Pacific time. So that'll be in the same spot you found the Zoom link for this session. You can find the link for that session. And it's just for anybody who has any questions about this workshop, any questions about further exploring the practice of hand drumming. So I encourage you to check that out. If you have any questions, I'll be there. And if not, I hope you got something out of this today, and please enjoy your evening. Thank you.